She stood at the edge of the courthouse shadows, rain dripping from her coat like blood from a wound. Timothy hadn't planned to be here, not like this, not in the flesh. But something in her bones dragged her back. 15 years vanished beneath new names, clean haircuts, ironed suits. But none of that could scrub the sting of her sister's words, "You're an embarrassment." Whispered like a secret. Carried like a curse. A week later, her key didn't fit the lock. A garbage bag of clothes wilted on the front porch. Her mother's back turned as if the daughter she'd raised had already died. They called her reckless. Unstable. A stain on the family's starched image. But Timothy knew the truth, she'd simply told the wrong secret to the wrong person, and in a house like theirs, truth was treason. The courtroom hummed with low voices, the kind that ripple through marble halls before a verdict. At the front, her sister sat in a fitted blazer, jaw locked, eyes glazed, a woman sculpted from cold ambition. District Attorney Stephanie Scott, once the family jewel, now on trial for evidence tampering and perjury. Timothy didn't speak. She didn't need to. The Larry squinted into the gallery, gaze catching on her silhouette like a snag in silk. "Wait, is that Timothy Scott?" he asked. A murmur swept through the room like wind through dry leaves. Her sister turned, saw her. And the color drained from her face like ink in water. That was the moment. The rupture. 15 years of silence cracked open into revelation. They used to call her nothing. Now the world called her governor. Years earlier, in a crumbling neighborhood near the rail yards, Sunday dinners were less about food and more about control. The Scott home, an old Victorian gasping under peeling paint, was lit like a stage set, chandelier flickering above a table too long and too cold. The air smelled of roast pork, old pride, and something sour underneath. Jeffrey Scott, retired police chief and executioner of dignity, sat like a stone throne at the table's head, raising his glass toward the flickering TV where Stephanie's face shone next to a CNN banner. "That's my girl," he said, voice thick with scotch and self-worship. A real Scott. No one looked at Timothy. She sat like a ghost at the far end, fork hovering midair. No one asked about her graduation. No one cared that she'd walked a stage alone last week, clutching a degree in humanities, not law, not medicine, not power. Just thought. Just soul. She hadn't told them the date. She hadn't wanted the shame of empty seats. Timothy was strange to them, a girl who painted the sunrise and quoted Simone while her family choked on silence and authority. She wore black boots smeared with charcoal, her fingers always ink-stained, her gaze far off. Her sister called her fragile. Her father called her irrelevant. But Timothy? Timothy listened. Timothy remembered. Timothy saw. Now, with every flashbulb in the courtroom capturing her presence, every reporter whispering her name, Timothy knew they could no longer bury her. The world had finally turned its head. And she was no longer their disgrace. She was the reckoning they never saw coming. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It started with a vibration, barely a whisper in her coat pocket. A message. Then 3 more. A voicemail she refused to play. By the time Timothy sat down and opened her laptop, it was already too late. There she was, on screen. Blurred music in the background, her voice laughing, her body exposed to millions of strangers. Private, stolen, weaponized. A night she barely remembered, turned into digital ammunition. He had done it. Justin. Her ex. The one who turned ugly when she ended it. The one who said, "You'll regret walking away." She just never imagined how far he'd go. She barely had time to breathe, let alone cry, before the ground gave out beneath her. Stephanie got to it first. Timothy wouldn't know that until later, when it no longer mattered. No warning. No comfort. Just a message to their father. This needs to be handled. Before it spreads. No mention of Timothy. Just the stain. Just the name. Dinner that night never happened. What came instead was a slammed door and Jeffrey's boots stomping down the hallway like a one-man army. He burst into her room, rage pulsing off him in heat waves. "You think this is how we raised you?" he roared, fists clenched, eyes bloodshot. "For the world to see you like some kind of whore." He stopped. The word hung there anyway, unspoken but loud. Timothy stood still, heart hammering, spine stiff. "I didn't post it," she said through a dry throat. "He did. I was the victim." "You were the disgrace," he shot back. "You dragged the Scott name through the dirt." He reached into his coat and tossed her college diploma onto the bed. It landed like a sentence. "You want to ruin yourself? Fine. But you do it without my roof, my name, or a cent from me." Her mother hovered in the hallway, one hand clutching her rosary like it might hold her upright. She said nothing. Didn't even blink. Timothy turned to Stephanie. A breath of hope. But Stephanie just stared, arms folded, face marble. No anger. No compassion. Just strategy. She packed slowly, like it was a ritual. A pair of jeans. 2 sketchbooks. Her old journals. The red backpack she hadn't used since freshman year. Light sliced through the blinds, striping the room in pale bars. She zipped the bag and stood there for a moment, staring at the bed like something had died on it. Then she walked out. Jeffrey was waiting in the living room. He didn't speak. Just placed her debit card on the table like it was her last inheritance. "Don't come back," he said. She didn't answer. Behind the curtain, Cynthia peeked out. Her lips moved in what might have been a prayer. Or just breath. She didn't wave. She didn't say goodbye. Timothy stepped into the muggy dusk, the air thick with smoke from some distant backyard fire. The first few nights, she couch-surfed. A friend's car. A stranger's floor. By the end of the week, kindness dried up. She boarded a Greyhound headed north, didn't care where it stopped. Anywhere but here. Somewhere her name meant nothing. Somewhere she could disappear. On the second night of the journey, under a cracked highway overpass just outside Santa Fe, she did the one thing she hadn't allowed herself yet. She let go. She pulled an old leather notebook from her bag, the one filled with her childhood. Family birthdays. Recipe scribbles. Her mother's handwriting from long-ago lunches. Page by page, she tore it up. Fed it to a tiny flame built with matchsticks and twigs. The fire caught fast, dancing in the shadows, eating her history like it was starving. She watched the last page curl into black ash and flick away. Then she turned and caught her reflection in the mirror of the bus behind her. Exhausted. Burned out. But no longer anyone's daughter. No longer anyone's secret. Ashes don't mourn what they were. They just scatter. Timothy stood beneath a jaundiced streetlight outside the Santa Fe bus station, smoke curling from the last burned page in her hand. Her chest didn't ache. Not anymore. Something colder had taken its place, something sharper. "There's nothing left to break," she whispered to the dark. "So I'll build from the wreckage." Winter hit Denver like a slow punishment. Wind slid beneath jackets, through brick and bone. Timothy found a room in a decrepit walk-up above a shuttered pawn shop, its windows fogged, its radiators old and stubborn. She slept on a second-hand mattress pushed against a wall that moaned with the weight of strangers' lives. Peeling paint curled like dried skin. The air smelled of mildew and resignation. She didn't care. Mornings began before sunrise, Timothy tying an apron behind her back, slipping into the rhythm of coffee pots and grease traps at a crumbling diner off East Colfax. The kind of place with cracked booths and regulars who tipped in nickels. Afternoons, she bleached linoleum and emptied biohazard bins at a walk-in clinic where sick children clung to their mothers, and hope thinned by the hour. Evenings blurred into late nights, her hunched over a flickering monitor in a temp office, punching in inventory logs for a freight company that addressed her only as Cam. She didn't speak much. She couldn't afford to. But at night, when silence returned like an old friend, Timothy wrote. Jagged thoughts, not in sentences, but in the cipher she'd invented in her childhood, a mix of symbols and slashes that only she could understand. Her own language. Her only one. One night, after a week without sleep and a shift where a man screamed in her face for forgetting his side of bacon, Timothy went home, took out a brush meant for scrubbing grout, dipped it in cheap paint, and slashed it across a torn piece of cardboard. By the end, it looked like a figure folding in on itself. A body devouring its own shadow. She tacked it to the wall, behind a sheet. She didn't want it seen. It wasn't for anyone else. A week later, she stood before a splintered bathroom mirror and cut her hair off in ragged handfuls. No emotion. Just necessity. Like scraping soot from glass. She stared at herself. Short hair. Hollow eyes. Clean slate. She registered a new name at the job board the next morning, Camrell. It wasn't her. Not really. But it would do. Then came the night everything cracked open again. Timothy was mopping near the clinic's back exit when raised voices echoed through the hallway. She moved toward them instinctively, half curiosity, half fear. A mother stood cornered, tiny, panicked, her daughter clutching her thigh. A uniformed officer towered above them, waving a clipboard like a weapon. Sign here. It's already filed. Just a formality. Timothy saw the terror in the mother's face. She wasn't reading the form. She couldn't. Something in Timothy's chest snapped. She's not signing that, she said, stepping between them. Her voice wasn't loud. But it was final. The officer blinked. Who are you? Doesn't matter. Those documents aren't valid anymore. That software? Outdated. It's already under review. It wasn't true. But it sounded like it was. The officer scowled, muttered something about protocol, and stormed off. The woman sank to her knees, hugging her daughter like a life raft. Timothy stood there, shaking. But not from fear. From clarity. Days later, she was called into an office she didn't know existed. No windows. Filing cabinets older than she was. A man stood inside, sleeves rolled to the elbows. You're Timothy Scott. Her chest tightened. Not anymore. He smiled. I'm Gary Hill. Procto Lib. I run the Immigrant Legal Defense Fund in this city. Word travels. She said nothing. Come work for me. Not as a cleaner. The work was slow. Thankless. She fetched coffee. She translated letters and tax forms, juggled bus tokens and childcare. She didn't complain. She was watching. Within a year, she was drafting policy guides and community action plans. 2 years in, she could speak fluent law in 2 languages. 3 years, and Timothy, now known quietly in advocacy circles as the Silent Knife, was appointed to Denver's Immigration Policy Advisory Council. No title on the door. No applause. Just a seat. Just a voice. A voice people leaned in to hear. That day, inside a wood-paneled hall that smelled of varnish and ego, the room buzzed with tension. A conservative councilman stood at the podium, reading from notes like scripture. Our shelters cannot become sanctuaries for illegals. We must coordinate with ICE. Order demands it. Murmurs. Nods. Discomfort ensues. Timothy waited. She didn't blink. Then, slowly, she leaned into the microphone. And spoke. If law won't stretch toward justice, she said, voice even, eyes locked on the room. Then justice becomes a statue, looked at, praised, but never alive. Silence held the space like a breath that wouldn't release. A few scattered claps. No rebuttal. The councilman sat back, blinking, either stunned or simply waiting for the storm to pass. It didn't. In the hallway, the walls buzzed with conversation. One voice caught hers, a younger one, nervous and caffeinated. "Excuse me, miss. Reese?" Timothy turned. A reporter, maybe 24, notebook already open, pen clicking. "Rocky Mountain Chronicle. We'd love to feature you. Local hero. Immigrant advocate." The next face of her form. Timothy exhaled slowly, like pulling herself back into her skin. "Only if you leave out my full name." The reporter hesitated. "So, no headshot?" "Call me C. Reese," she said. "That's enough." A pause. "Why the secrecy?" Her smile was there, but her eyes weren't. "I've been seen before. Just not the way I wanted to be." That night, in the small studio she now called hers, new walls, clean floors, quiet above the traffic, Timothy lit a candle. The ritual never changed. She placed it before a black and white family photo, aged and curling at the edges. Her own face had been scraped away, rubbed raw with a coin until it blurred into nothing. She stared at the empty space. Then whispered, as always. "Let them remember the work. Not the names. Not the wounds." Then she blew out the flame. Sometimes, she wondered if Cynthia ever lit candles for her. If Jeffrey still told people he had 2 daughters. She didn't ask. Didn't search their names. Didn't need to. Distance was a kind of sanctuary. And healing didn't always look like returning. Sometimes it meant vanishing long enough to grow roots no one could rip out again. One afternoon, over bitter coffee in the back room at Procto Lib, Brenda, a city government veteran with a voice like gravel and hands full of grace, leaned across the table. "You ever think about showing people who you really are?" Timothy shrugged. "They know who I am now." "No. I mean who you used to be." She didn't hesitate this time. "I'm not hiding. I'm just choosing who sees me. And when." Brenda nodded, slow. She understood. Some people bury their past. Timothy had simply refused to let hers define her shape. But silence, like light, attracts attention. Especially when it's too steady. Weeks later, in a public park beneath faded banners and cold sky, Timothy stepped to a modest podium. About 70 people gathered, families, activists, tired voters, old friends of strangers. "I'm not here to defend a party," she began, voice firm. "I'm here to represent the ones who carry the table but never get a seat." She didn't talk about her car nights. Didn't talk about Denver winters or scrub buckets. No origin story. No apology. Her campaign slogan read, "Let the work speak first." No headshot. Just a promise. It wasn't a rise, it was a climb. Quiet. Relentless. Built on 10,000 unseen hours. She wasn't running toward power. She was running so no one like her would have to run again. Then came the headline. It flashed across her screen one cold Saturday morning like a slap in the chest. District Attorney under investigation for evidence tampering. Stephanie Scott named in formal inquiry. Timothy stared at the screen. The name, sharp as a blade. Unread in years. Unspoken longer. Now bold. Public. Irrevocable. The story unfolded fast. A whistleblower. A sealed document altered. A mother from Honduras, facing deportation, denied exculpatory evidence. Protests outside the courthouse. Commentators splitting into battle lines, justice or vendetta, ethics or political sabotage. Disbarment. Indictment. Prison. All possible. Timothy didn't cry. Didn't smile. Didn't call anyone. She just stood still, the news humming from her screen like a siren. The impact wasn't rage. It wasn't victory. It was recognition. The kind that echoes in your chest like the aftershock of something once buried clawing its way to the surface. She watched the coverage from 1,000 miles away. But the ghosts were closer than that. Timothy didn't flinch at the headlines. She didn't need the details. She'd seen this play before, just never from the audience. Her press team was immediate, controlled. "Stay silent," one advisor urged. "Let the process unfold. This isn't your war." "You're the sitting governor," said another. "This could backfire." Optics, Timothy. But Timothy wasn't thinking about optics. She was thinking about that courtroom. About what had lived there. About what had died there. She wasn't going back for Stephanie. God, no. She was going back for the unspoken. For the version of herself they'd buried but never fully erased. She booked her own flight. No press alert. No motorcade. No calls home. She arrived in San Antonio cloaked in simplicity, black slacks, a long coat, dark glasses. Invisible and unmistakable, all at once. At the courthouse, she entered through a side door, the same door defendants used. The irony didn't escape her. Inside, the air was too clean. The kind of sterile that tried to cover history. She chose the last row. The one where shadows pooled. From there, Timothy could see the whole theater. Lawyers shifting papers, microphones whispering static, journalists leaning forward like vultures hungry for weakness. And then Stephanie appeared. Polished. Rigid. Her blouse pressed within an inch of its life. Her expression carved from ice. She looked invincible. But Timothy saw it, the twitch in her fingers, the clenched jaw behind the lipstick. Larry entered. A woman who did not tolerate chaos, or cowardice. Timothy remembered her from a summit years ago. A presence as commanding as a gavel strike. Jameson scanned the courtroom. Then her eyes locked on Timothy. She paused. Squinted. Her brows lifted. Wait, is that Timothy Scott? A beat. The governor? A ripple tore through the room. Chairs creaked. Gasps rose like static. A journalist near the front muttered, "Oh my God, get that shot." Flashes followed. Phones lifted. The sound of truth arriving, uninvited. Stephanie turned sharply, eyes colliding with Timothy's. Shock didn't describe it. Her lips parted, but no words escaped. Cynthia Scott sat beside her, fingers clutching rosary beads that had once been her compass. Now she looked pale, brittle. She whispered something, a prayer or a curse, maybe both. Jeffrey leaned forward, squinting like an old soldier seeing a ghost he'd tried to forget. Timothy didn't blink. Didn't speak. Didn't move. Her posture was perfect. Not stiff. Not angry. Just undeniable. She wasn't here to fight. She was the consequence. The Larry cleared her throat. We'll proceed. But the room never settled. Ice kept drifting back. As if the air itself knew what it meant to have her there. Cameras clicked. Someone tried to step closer, until a bailiff stopped them with a firm shake of the head. Timothy stayed silent. She watched. She endured the whole hearing like a survivor walking through her old battlefield. When it ended, she stood. No goodbyes. No glances. She left through the same side door, disappearing into the sun-blasted sidewalk as if swallowed by her own silence. By the time she reached her hotel, her phone was an explosion of missed calls. Messages from names she hadn't heard in a decade. News outlets. Think pieces. Requests for interviews. Documentary pitches. Talk show appearances. But this time, she wasn't trending because of shame. This time, her name wasn't a wound. It was a reckoning. She sat by the window that night, watching the lights of her old city bleed across the glass. She saw herself reflected back, not a silhouette. Something fuller. Something made of scars and steel. Timothy Scott had returned. Not as a sister. Not as a daughter. But as a mirror they couldn't break. By the next morning, her name was wildfire. Every feed. Every cheerin'. Every headline. Colorado governor stuns courtroom with silent return. Estranged sister of indicted DA breaks years of silence, without saying a word. Timothy Scott, the redemption no one saw coming. The takes kept coming. From exile to executive, the woman who refused to vanish. Did Timothy save the family name, or bury it for good? And then the real fire started. Somewhere in the internet's shadowed underbelly, someone had found it. The clip. The grainy, stolen video. The one Timothy had tried to burn out of existence. It resurfaced like a monster dragged from the swamp. Pixelated, but recognizable. Her face, her body. 23. A rented house. A boy with a grinning lie. A phone that became a weapon. Spring break had been a blur of warm nights, cheap alcohol, and temporary escape. Timothy remembered laughter. Dancing. The flicker of lights on her skin. What she didn't remember was saying yes to being filmed. Now, years later, the world had found it. The headlines didn't flinch. Governor's shame, leaked video surfaces. Scandal shadows political star. Scott family, one sister on trial, another on tape. Then came the talk show. There he was, Justin, her ex, sitting in a well-lit studio, the shame of it all softened into banter. "We were kids," he said with a smirk. She knew. "I mean, I didn't think it'd go viral. It was just a thing." Timothy watched from her office, alone. She didn't blink. She didn't call legal. She didn't curse or hide or speak. She let it play. She let it burn. Because she'd already walked through that fire once, and she hadn't come out ash. Her staff panicked. "Do we issue a response? Threaten defamation? Shut it down? We can frame it as revenge porn, spin it." Timothy raised a hand. Just one. They stopped talking. Her voice was quiet. Final. "Let them look," she said. "I've survived being seen before." The next call came from a number that rang like a wound. Jeffrey Scott. His voice still held steel, like nothing had changed, like he could still command her silence with tone alone. "You're dragging the family through the dirt," he snapped. "Using our name for pity. 4 votes. You're embarrassing us again." Timothy leaned back, fingers drumming the edge of her desk. "I carried that name longer than you carried me," she said calmly. "I didn't keep it for pride. I kept it as a warning." Click. He hung up. Later that night, her cousin called from San Antonio, voice low. Cynthia had collapsed. High blood pressure. They weren't sure how bad it was. Timothy didn't hesitate. She booked the red eye. No cameras followed her into the hospital. She walked in alone. No guards. No press release. Just her, a duffel bag, and a silence that pressed like snow. Cynthia looked smaller than Timothy remembered, shrunk by time and regret. Her hair gray at the temples. Her fingers clutching the blanket like an anchor. Their eyes met. "Timothy," her mother rasped. The name didn't sting the way it used to. Timothy stood still. "If it's true, what they're saying," Cynthia whispered, "then I've spent so many years not seeing you at all." Tears rimmed the woman's eyes. Timothy didn't cry. She didn't scold. She just sat. Took her mother's fragile hand between her own and held it. Not to forgive. Not to be forgiven. Just to exist. Side by side. 2 women. 2 silences. One long echo of what could never be undone. When Cynthia fell asleep, Timothy rose without a word. From her bag, she pulled a small canvas. She left it on the table by the bed. It was a painting, one she had made on a night when the air wouldn't let her sleep. A woman in a desert. Her shadow too long. Distorted. Towering. It was called Witness. She left the room without leaving a note. Back in Colorado, the world hadn't softened. Cameras swarmed the gates outside her office. Tabloids recycled headlines. Commentators debated her fitness for office. Timothy gave them nothing. No rebuttal. No crafted post. Not even a sentence. She didn't hide either. At the next cabinet meeting, she entered like she always did, deliberate, precise. The room stilled. Advisors held their breath. Timothy stepped to the podium. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I won't rewrite the past, she said. But I decide what it becomes. Not them. Not you. Me. Then she opened the agenda. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because silence, when owned, is not weakness. It is command. The indictment came like a slow, breaking tide. Stephanie Scott, formally charged. Evidence tampering. Obstruction of justice. The headlines no longer shielded her. Her allies disappeared. One by one, her colleagues stepped back. Disappointed. Shocked. Betrayed. The woman once called unshakable was now unraveling in public. Timothy watched, eyes unreadable. And then her phone lit up. Cynthia Scott. For a moment, Timothy just stared at the screen. Not moving. Not answering. Not yet. Because some ghosts don't scream. They whisper. And this one had her voice. The voice on the phone was fragile, like it could tear with a breath. Mija. Cynthia barely got the word out. Please. Just once. Come home. Share a meal. She didn't say dinner. She said home, as if the house had ever been one. Timothy didn't respond right away. Just let the silence stretch long enough to remind them how much time had passed. That night, a second message arrived. This time, not a voice, just words on a screen. No punctuation. No softness. From Jeffrey, we need to talk. No calls for 15 years. No letters. No birthdays. Now they all remembered her number. Timothy stared at the screen, thumb hovering over delete. Then, for reasons she couldn't name, she typed. I'll come. Once. Friday, dusk. The Scott house stood unchanged, except smaller somehow. Like time had gnawed at its corners. She stepped onto the porch with hands in her coat pockets, heart like ice on stone. Cynthia opened the door with a trembling smile, mascara smudged at the edges like smoke after fire. Inside, the air was too clean. Polished wood, scrubbed surfaces, anxiety masked in citrus oil. Jeffrey wore a crisp shirt like armor. Stephanie sat at the table like she was attending her own wake, head bowed, hands fidgeting with a napkin. The seat left for Timothy was familiar. The same crooked frame from her childhood, now wrapped in new leather, an old wound, reupholstered. The food was immaculate. Steamed tortillas. Enchiladas in red sauce. Rice dusted with lime. Wine no one touched. Cynthia tried to fill the silence with soft-edged stories. You used to doodle suns on the napkins, she said, as if that memory could glue years back together. Jeffrey followed suit. Your last speech, well written. Very professional. You've made the name look important again. Timothy didn't speak. She watched. Measured. Waited. Finally, Stephanie's voice slipped out, quiet as falling ash. I didn't mean for any of this. I never thought. She trailed off. Let the pity finish the sentence. Then it came, the real reason for the invitation. Cynthia reached, then stopped short of touching Timothy's hand. We were wondering if, maybe, you could speak to the prosecutor. Just a word. A sentence. Family helping family. Timothy set her fork down. Slowly. Deliberately. The sound rang out, sharp, final. If I were a waitress, she said, voice calm as glass, would you still call me Blood? Silence answered. She rose. I didn't keep your name for legacy, she added. I kept it to remind myself what not to return to. She walked toward the door without hurry, without guilt. Her coat swept behind her like a curtain closing on a play she'd never agreed to perform in. Cynthia called out behind her, "Timothy, please." But Timothy didn't turn. She stepped into the night air, cool, quiet, and finally her own. At 3:12 a.m., her phone buzzed. One image. Then another. Then more. Screenshots of private emails from her 20s. A grainy still of the old spring break video, her body, blurred but unmistakable. A photo of her outside a Denver shelter, head in her hands. No sender. No note. Just exposure. She stared at the screen, backlit in the dark. Not afraid. Not shocked. Just aware. By 9 a.m., her comms director stood at her office door with a pale face and a tablet. "It's everywhere," she said. Some French blog posted it first. Now it's moving fast. On the screen. The real Timothy, the governor's past unveiled. Timothy didn't speak. Didn't ask for spin. Didn't blink. At noon, a quiet call from D.C. A voice she trusted. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but your father's been asking around. Old contacts. Federal clearance records. He's trying to dig." Pause. "Not to protect you. To contain you. He's looking for your fault line." Timothy sat back in her chair, closed her eyes. Not panic. Not grief. Calculation. This wasn't scandal. It was a move. A gambit. They weren't trying to ruin her. They were trying to own her. Again. So that night, she didn't brace for the storm. She walked directly into it. Not as a victim. Not as a daughter. As the one holding the match. She didn't stand in front of flags. She didn't stand with fanfare. She stood alone. No anthem played. No line of security. Just a narrow spotlight and the soft rustle of sketches behind her, sunbursts, birds, broken homes drawn by children who once had no voice. She wore white. Not for purity. For contrast. No microphone theatrics. No raised fists. She began quietly. Power is rarely loud. It comes in gestures. An invitation to dinner. A father reminding you who built your name. A sister reminding you who nearly erased it. She looked up. "This bill is for everyone who's ever been cornered by family and told it was love." And with that, she introduced the Witness Coercion Accountability Act, a law that would criminalize any attempt to manipulate public servants or whistleblowers through blood, blackmail, or personal history. No one was named. But everyone recognized the shadow cast. The story spread fast. Scott rewrites the rules, new bill shields the silenced. The governor who came back from oblivion, and brought a law with her. Family, fame, and the cost of power, Timothy Scott speaks without speaking. And this time, the narrative didn't twist. There were no salacious interviews. No scandals. No manufactured outrage. Just the facts. And her stillness. Her family remained quiet. Jeffrey, silent. Cynthia, no messages. Stephanie, nowhere to be seen. Timothy didn't chase them. She walked Denver streets like any other citizen, no entourage, no press shadow. Just a coat, a coffee, and the knowledge that people whispered now not because they pitied her, but because they respected her silence. And that was enough. Then, one afternoon, her assistant appeared at her office door. "Governor. Stephanie Scott is downstairs." She came without notice. "Asked to speak to you. Alone." Timothy set her pen down. Blinked once. Then. "Send her in." She didn't rehearse. Didn't reach for notes. She cleared her desk. Left only a single glass of water. Stephanie walked in slowly, shoulders slumped, clothes too plain for the woman she once was in courtrooms and campaigns. She sat without speaking. Eyes down. Voice barely audible. I'm not here to beg. Or to excuse it. I just wanted to say it to your face. I made you invisible because I was afraid of being outshone. She swallowed. And when I saw who you became, I realized I'd tried to bury something I didn't understand. And now, I can't even see the top of where you've climbed. Timothy didn't respond right away. She studied her sister like a historian might examine an artifact, with distance, with care, but no desire to resurrect it. You didn't destroy me, she said at last. You deleted me. But I kept writing. Even when no one was reading. Stephanie's hands trembled in her lap. Mom still thinks you'll pull some strings. Still believes we're family in the way we used to be. Timothy looked out the window, to the pale curve of the sun beginning to sink behind the city skyline. I stopped trying to be saved a long time ago. And I won't be cast as anyone else's redeemer. There was no tension in her voice. Only precision. Stephanie blinked hard. Thank you for listening. I didn't think you would. Timothy gave a small nod. Not approval. Acknowledgement. And that was all. No tears. No theatrical exit. No absolution. As Stephanie rose to leave, her hand brushed the edge of the desk. There, almost hidden beneath a folder, sat a charred envelope. She didn't ask. Timothy didn't explain. But it had once been a plea. A letter of support. Now half-burned. Unsent. Unneeded. The door closed behind her. Timothy turned back to her screen. Drafted language for the next legislative package filled the document, protections for asylum seekers who'd been silenced, for teenage whistleblowers without legal guardians, for the children still drawing sons behind cages. She kept writing. Because some wounds don't end with healing. They end with architecture. With the building of something no one else had the nerve to begin. The light above the stage flickered, once, twice, then held steady like it had made a decision. Timothy Scott stood behind a curtain made of cheap black velvet, her pulse loud in her ears. The air in the auditorium was thick with recycled heat and the breath of people holding secrets. She could taste it, like dust and ash. They told her this was a conference. It felt more like a reckoning. Not the polished kind. Not in some marble-pillared statehouse. This was an old Union Hall in a decaying part of the city, red brick walls cracked like old bones. Outside, the wind howled through the alleyways, carrying sirens and forgotten names. Inside, they waited, survivors of betrayal, dressed in second-hand suits and trauma. Whistleblowers. Truth-tellers. People who had been gutted not by strangers, but by fathers. Husbands. Sisters. Blood. Timothy's name echoed over the speakers, low and stripped of ceremony. Governor Timothy Scott. Advocate. Reformer. Daughter. She stepped onto the stage, not into applause, but into a silence that throbbed like an open wound. I was once called a disgrace, she said without preamble, her voice a clean cut through the quiet. Then I was erased. Then I was threatened. Not with guns. With memories. A flicker of recognition passed through the crowd. Sharp exhales. Tight jaws. One woman pressed a shaking hand to her collarbone like she was remembering something too dangerous to say aloud. I'm not here for apologies, Timothy continued. I'm here to make sure no one else has to choose between truth and loyalty, and call that love. She let her eyes sweep the crowd. Saw shadows. Front row, an empty chair with a paper sign taped to it. Reserved for who she once hoped to be. Someone gasped. Good. 2 rows behind, her mother sat still, face pale, hands folded so tight her knuckles were bloodless. Cynthia Scott hadn't spoken to Timothy in 3 years. But tears slipped silently down her cheeks like she'd finally run out of ways to hold them back. Further back, arms crossed like a barricade, was Jeffrey. No badge, no uniform. Just an old man in a wrinkled shirt, trying to shrink behind his own guilt. Stephanie wasn't there. Not in body. But she was always there in Timothy's spine. Timothy took a breath. "I'm introducing a new policy," she said. A murmur. "It's called the Public Kinship Act." Informally? "The Family Transparency Clause." Pause. Let it land. "It protects public employees who disclose familial conflicts of interest, from retaliation, demotion, or being branded disloyal. It protects truth-tellers. Even from their own last names." The silence broke like a fever. Some cried. Some stared. The reporters, those who'd crept in quietly, clicked furiously. Finally, they said, "A leader who names the wound before it festers." Timothy walked off stage alone. No flowers. No ovation. Just a clean, unfamiliar silence inside her chest. Something had been exhumed. Not buried, freed. She didn't burn the Scott name. She made it mean something else. 6 months later. South Denver, 11:42 a.m. The air smelled like scorched coffee and old paper. A former church converted into a community space, still echoey, still sacred in a broken kind of way. No staff. No media trucks. Just 40 chairs, half full, and a crooked chalkboard behind a folding table. On it, someone had scrawled in rough strokes. "Ruthless leadership." Timothy walked in through the side door. No blazer, no makeup. Gray cardigan. Jeans. Hair pulled back in a knot like she couldn't afford the time to care. She helped stack a few extra chairs. Poured herself coffee. Black. Burned. Just the way she liked it now. People turned slowly. Then fully. A ripple of recognition swept the room like wind across a field. No fanfare. She stepped forward. No mic. No title. Just her. "People ask me all the time," she began quietly, "how did you make it without your family's support?" Beat. I didn't. Pause. Let them breathe that in. I just stopped waiting for them. A few laughs, soft, surprised. Real. "We don't choose our blood," she said. "But we choose the weight we carry forward. And maybe more importantly, the ones we set down." From the back, a woman stood. Mid-50s. Lines carved deep from years of silence. Her voice cracked like old wood. "What if one day, they really change?" she asked. "What if they come back different?" Timothy looked at her. Really looked. Then said, voice low. "Then I'll meet them there. But I won't go back to fetch them." The woman's question still hung in the air like smoke. Timothy didn't flinch. Didn't smile. She just tilted her head, almost imperceptibly, as if listening for a sound no one else could hear. "If they change," she said at last, voice low, "I'll let them speak." A pause. Then, colder. "But I'm done editing my own past to make theirs look softer." Her words landed like frost on glass, delicate, sharp. And just like that, the room stilled again. Not out of reverence. Out of recognition. Out of that ache that surfaces when someone names the thing you've buried for years. That's when she felt it. A gaze burning through the crowd like a spotlight. She turned her head, slowly, and there he was. Jeffrey Scott. Leaning against the back wall beneath a broken exit sign, as if deciding whether to flee or stay and bleed. No authority left in him. No armor. Just an old man wrapped in regret, watching a woman he once silenced stand at the center of a room he'd never dared enter. Their eyes met. And in that glance, no plea. No blame. Just the unbearable clarity of what could never be undone. She kept speaking, but her voice had shifted. No longer reaching for anyone. Just anchoring herself. When the session ended, people clapped. Not out of habit, but hunger. They weren't applauding her. They were applauding the space she'd carved, where their own voices might one day fit. The crowd began to disperse. Folding chairs scraped concrete. Plastic coffee cups were crushed under shoes. Timothy stayed still, gaze fixed on the back of the room. She knew he would come. And he did. Quietly. No one noticed the way he moved, like a man approaching a grave he helped dig. No stage. No mic. He stopped 10 feet from her and spoke. "I didn't understand my daughter." His voice rasped like a door long rusted shut. A pause. Like the world holding its breath. But maybe that's not the point. Another breath. Slower. Maybe it was never about understanding her. Maybe it was about facing the parts of myself I tried to bury in her. Then, softer. "She did what I couldn't. What I didn't have the guts to do." He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't offer a speech. Just those words. Exposed. Raw. Final. Timothy didn't cry. Didn't speak. Didn't fold. She just looked at him, and in that glance was everything he'd never earned, and everything she no longer needed to give. Then, slowly, she bowed her head. Not in surrender. In acknowledgement. That he had finally stood still long enough to see her. Outside, the sky had gone white, not with sun, but with snow. Thick flakes fell like ash, soft and merciless. Children ran across the iced-over playground, their laughter slicing the cold. Timothy stepped into the streetlight's pale glow, coat unbuttoned, eyes dry. She didn't look back. She just walked. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just free. There had been a time she clawed for visibility, begged for a face in the crowd to say, "I see you." But that need had burned away. Now, she saw herself. Clearly. Entirely. And that was the last piece. The final freedom.